It's the Whiskey Wizard.
Hello and welcome to the Whiskey Wizard, where we say that whiskey making takes scientific knowledge, an artisan's skill and dedication, and a bit of the wizard's alchemy of light, air, earth, and fire. Okay, tonight we're going to talk about rye whiskey. The wizard has covered the topic in the past, but you know what? We're going to do it again. Why the hell not? Things are always on the move, and so we try to keep things fresh here on the Roundtable. In the United States, rye whiskey is by law made from a mash of at least 51% rye. The other ingredients in the mash are usually corn and malted barley. It is distilled to no more than 160 US proof or 80% ABV and aged in charred new oak barrels. The whiskey must be put in the barrels at no more than 125 proof or 62.5% ABV. Rye whiskey that has been aged for at least 2 years and has not been blended with other spirits may be further designated as straight rye whiskey. Okay, so there you have the basics. So rye and bourbon are often made of the same things. More than 51% corn, you typically have a bourbon. More than 51% rye in the grain bill, and you've got a rye. Sometimes ryes have no corn, but often it makes up at least part of the rye mash bill. Keep in mind, Canadian whiskey is often labeled as rye whiskey for historical reasons, although it may or may not actually include any rye grain in its production process. Still, today, many recent American rye whiskey releases are 70% rye or more. There are many 100% ryes now available out there. So let's take a step back. What is rye? It's a member of the wheat tribe and is closely related to both wheat and barley. Rye is a cereal grain and should not be confused with rye grass, which is used for lawns, pasture, and hay for livestock. Rye is one of a number of cereal species that grow wild in the Levant, central and eastern Turkey, and in adjacent areas. Evidence uncovered at sites in the Euphrates Valley of northern Syria suggests that rye was amongst the first cereal crops to be systematically cultivated around 13,000 years ago. However, that claim still remains a bit controversial. Rye grows better than any other cereal on heavy clay and light, sandy, or infertile or drought-affected soils. It can tolerate pH between 4.5 and 8, but soils having a pH of 5 to 7 are best suited for rye cultivation. Rye grows best on fertile, well-drained loam or clay loam soils. Rye is grown prominently in Eastern and Central and Northern Europe, and the main rye belt stretches from northern Germany through Poland, Ukraine, Belarus, Lithuania, and Latvia into central and northern Russia. Rye is also grown in Northern America, Canada and the United States, in South America, Argentina, Brazil, and Chile, in Oceania, Australia, New Zealand, in Turkey, in Kazakhstan, and in northern China. Rye flour is high in gliadin, but low in glutenin. It therefore has a lower gluten content than wheat flour. It also contains a higher proportion of soluble fiber than does wheat. Okay, back to whiskey. Rye whiskey was historically the prevalent whiskey in the northeastern states, especially Pennsylvania and Maryland, and Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania was the center of rye whiskey production in the late 1700s and early 1800s. By 1808, Allegheny County, Pennsylvania farmers were selling 1/2 barrel for each man, woman, and child in the country. Of course, we did a whole Whiskey Wizard on the Whiskey Rebellion, so check that out. By the 1880s, Moore and Sinnott, located in Monongahela, Pennsylvania, was the single largest producer of rye whiskey with a capacity of 30,000 barrels a year. Rye whiskey largely disappeared after Prohibition. A few brands, such as Old Overholt, survived, although by the late 1960s, former Pennsylvania brands like Old Overholt were being distilled mostly in Kentucky. Rye whiskey has been enjoying a big and growing revival in the United States. More distilleries than ever are releasing rye whiskeys over a wide range of premium aged and barrel finished ryes. For example, Brown-Forman began production of a Jack Daniel's rye whiskey and released unaged and lightly aged versions as limited editions. As we've discussed in previous episodes, a reconstructed distillery at Mount Vernon, the estate of George Washington, sells a rye that is produced to the original whiskey recipe that Washington made. At its peak, Washington's original distillery was among the largest producers of rye whiskey in the United States, averaging 11,000 U.S. gallons per year. Scotch whiskey distillers were using rye as a mash ingredient for grain whiskey in the 18th century. By the 2020s, tariffs on biogas producers had led to an increase in availability of the grain, leading modern distilleries to begin experimenting with rye as an alternate raw material. After an impressive 13% volume increase in 2021, American rye whiskey sustained its momentum into this year with a year-on-year average growth of 19.8% compared to 13.3% for bourbon. Rye has been among the hottest in the market in recent years, and we've seen 1.26 million 9-liter cases in annual depletions last year, according to Impact Databank, nearly doubling its total since 2015. Diageo-owned Bullet Rye leads the field with a wide margin, with volume up 9% in 2021 compared to the prior year. Utah-based High West has seen its rye expression continue to rise since 2016. Over the past 5 years, High West rye depletions have risen by 2/3 to 60,000 cases, placing it among the leading brands in the category. Rye is a growing part of the mix for Beam Suntory, which counts Knob Creek, Old Overholt, Basil Hayden, and Jim Beam amongst its rye offerings. Basil Hayden's rye registered particularly strong with growth last year, soaring 18%. Among other key brands, Redemption Rye is now the fastest growing variant of Deutsche Family wine and spirits for a range of whiskeys, and depletions are up 25% in its fiscal year. Rye is also well positioned for major whiskey marketers, and these upscale expressions generally sell for roughly 2/3 more at retail than their straight American whiskey counterparts, according to Databank. What about taste? Overall, the greatest difference between bourbon and rye whiskey really comes down to the taste, and you can tie the distinct flavor profiles back to the main ingredients. The corn mash used to make bourbon results in a sweet, caramel-like and full-bodied flavor. The rye mash used to make rye whiskey means that the taste tends to be spicier, drier, and more savory. Bourbon flavors are typically easier for a novice to enjoy because of the noticeable sweetness and consistency, while the intensity of rye whiskey is a little bit more of an acquired taste. One additional note is that rye whiskey is usually the first to grab for classic cocktails because many of those recipes call for sugar or blending with other sweet liqueurs. Using bourbon as the base could lead to the drink being too sweet. Personally, I like rye's savory flavor profile, rich in baking spices like nutmeg, allspice, cloves, and cinnamon. I like to avoid overly sweet cocktails, and this is cocktail season, so rye is my go-to whiskey for mixing up something refreshing. Man, there are so many great rye offerings out there these days. Michter's Single Barrel Rye is one of my favorites, as well as Russell's Reserve Single Barrel Rye. Oh, and of course, a recent favorite of mine is Nashville Barrel Company's Single Barrel Rye. If you get a chance, do try some of these Nashville Barrel Company boutique distillery offerings. Anyway, so if you are relatively new to the world of fine whiskey, do give rye a try. Why not? That's all for now. This is Douglas Dunbar, the Whiskey Wizard for the Whiskey Roundtable. And now,
Hey whiskey fans!
You can catch the Whiskey Wizard this Friday evening at 7:30 p.m. Eastern, live on the Whiskey Roundtable.
Grab a favorite pour and join in the fun as they inform us while tasting and evaluating a new whiskey selection on each show.
So tune in, hang out, and enjoy some laughs with the friends on this Friday's live Whiskey Roundtable YouTube videocast.
Cheers and Slán Java!